Welcome everybody to the KnowTalks series, a collaboration between the United Nations Development Programme and Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Knowledge Foundation. My name is Iaroslava Kharkova. I'm an Associate Project Officer at the Education Sector at UNESCO, and I am very pleased to moderate this session on digital skills, the zero choice. Please note that the interpretation is available in Arabic. Our colleague Anthony will now share a slide where you can see how to switch on the interpretation. So for better experience, please click on mute original audio. We would also like to inform you that there is a poll available on our social media. You can see our accounts in social media, and please don't hesitate to answer the poll and to let us know what you think. So today, we have an incredible opportunity to listen and ask questions Professor Ellen Helsper, who works in the Department of Media and Communications at the London School of Economics and Political Science. She's an expert on the links between social and digital inequalities and specializes in studying how socioeconomic and sociocultural inequalities are related to the distribution of digital skills and literacies, and how this lead to inequalities in the positive and negative outcomes that individuals achieve from ICT use. She has been involved in a number of international initiatives, including the Youth Skills and the From Digital Skills to Tangible Outcomes projects. Professor Helsper has just published a book on the social causes and consequences of digital inequalities, the digital disconnect. Indeed, today's topic has never been so relevant. Let me remind you that percentage of youth and adults who have achieved at least a minimum level of proficiency in digital literacy skills is one of the indicators of the Sustainable Development Goal 4 on education, which is part of the ambitious 2030 agenda adopted by an international community back in 2015. Rapid digitalization and fragilities and inequalities revealed by the COVID-19 pandemic only underline the growing importance of digital skills in all areas of our lives. Just to give you an example, in the area of education, according to UNESCO, at least 463 million, or nearly 1/3 of students globally, cannot access remote learning, mainly due to a lack of online learning policies, lack of equipment to connect from home, or lack of skills. Moreover, internet connectivity at home doesn't guarantee effective learning or meaningful use of technology. Many students and teachers don't have appropriate digital skills required to find and use educational content online. And this is not only in the area of education. Today, we will learn more about different types and levels of digital skills, how inequalities in digital skills lead to social inequalities or vice versa, and how interactions with people and environments shape what we think about technologies. But let me now hand over to Dr. Helsper.
Thank you very much, Yara, for the wonderful introduction. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. I have some slides which will be shared afterwards, and I believe you will all have access to the poll that will be also shared on social media about some of the results that I will be spotting here. Let me start sharing screen. First test of digital skills. Here we go. And you should all be able to see my presentation. Let's see. Oh, here we go. Okay, so I hope you can all see the presentation. I'm sure I'll hear if something technical is going wrong. So as Yara already mentions, if there's anything that the pandemic has told us, is that basic access to information and communication technologies is kind of essential to be able to participate in society, in modern society, from participating in the labor market to participating in education and connecting with governments and loved ones. However, research and also policy and interventions have shown that access is not sufficient to have a rich and productive experience with the opportunities that the digital world offers. And the problematic here, in terms of also the research that I'm doing, is that inequalities in the extent to which someone is able to engage in and with the digital world after one has acquired access kind of go and amplify some of the historical inequalities between regions and between different socioeconomic and sociocultural groups. So alongside access, digital skills are indispensable for people to be full and equally participating citizens. And my research focuses on the causes and the consequences of digital inequalities. And I just published this book, The Digital Disconnect, in which I summarize the kind of almost 2 decades of work that me and my colleagues on projects such as the From Digital Skills to Tangible Outcomes project and the Youth Skills project and the Global Kids Online projects have focused on. And so in this research, there's been a lot of discussion around the broad range of digital literacies that are needed and that kind of also go beyond the kind of more operational technical skills that they relate to inequalities in these outcomes that people are able to achieve as societies become increasingly digital. So that's what I will be focusing my talk on as well. And let's start with some data here on kind of access, because access still is important. It's fundamental. Without access to technologies, we can't obviously engage with the content and the services and the products that are opportunities that are available in that digital space. And a lack of access in particular regions and socioeconomic groups is still a significant problem. So let's not underestimate that. Important, though, is to realize that even when, for example, there are more mobile phones, which has become the main point of access, especially for more socioeconomically disadvantaged groups, the quality of connections, the infrastructure and the types of phones and what people are able to do with them are unequally distributed along socioeconomic lines. And so we can see here that mobile phones are still kind of, there's now more mobile phones than people globally, but in some countries, this is still not the case. Right? And we have some in the sub-Saharan African region, there's still not everybody a phone per person. And often the richer households have more than one device. We can also see that access to different devices is unequally distributed along these kinds of socioeconomic lines. And it is important to realize that just access to a mobile phone is not the same. It doesn't give you the same quality and ability to participate more broadly and actively in digital societies, or kind of imagine writing an essay or doing programming online and just having access to a phone. So, the focus of this talk is obviously digital skills. And so that's what I will focus on for the rest of this talk. So having access is by no means enough. It doesn't automatically lead to a productive use of ICTs or positive experiences in digital societies. To be able to take the advantage of the opportunities, people need these digital skills. And up until now, the biggest focus has been on these kinds of skills that are the technical and operational skills, information navigation and processing skills that are here depicted on the left-hand side of this model. Interaction and communication skills, and content creation and consumption skills that we have realized through research are extremely important to convert use into positive outcomes, into kind of the benefits in everyday life, are often still underdeveloped and underrepresented in most policy. Another thing that we've realized through our research is that actually we need to make a distinction between functional skills, which are the skills that people use to engage with the technologies in the ways that are designed, and its more critical understanding of technologies. And it is especially inequalities in that more critical understanding of why technologies work the way they do, what the consequences are of the way in which we use technologies on other people, or in the way that technologies are designed, and the ability of other people to engage with them. That are fundamental, and that these inequalities are still very much present and extremely important. So if we think about, therefore, digital literacy as the broader definition that includes all of this, then we have defined that as the opportunity and ability to use ICTs or decide not to use them, very important, often forgotten, in ways that allow individuals to obtain beneficial outcomes across all domains of everyday life and avoid the more negative outcomes, not just for yourselves, but also for others that are part of that same society, not just now and in the terms of being able to use the technologies that there are now, but also the technologies that will be there in the future. And this is important because our digital future might look quite different from the one that we're using now. So digital literacy needs to encompass that. Now, my research focuses on social-digital inequality in these kinds of literacies and ability to engage. And these are the systematic differences between different regions of the world and between different socio-demographic groups in terms of the opportunities and abilities to use ICTs. And as I said before, it's important that we discuss this opportunity and ability to use ICTs in a very broad way and not just in terms of access. So let me move on to a few more data. One of the things that we know that this unequal distribution is kind of linked to wider inequalities. Yeah. So what we can see here is that the kind of regions that have these kind of basic skills, basic content creation skills, are also that are disadvantaged in that area, are also the ones that have problems in creating a population with more advanced skills, and that often the people who are in this graph at the bottom left, or the countries, sorry, that are at the bottom left of this graph, are the ones who also have high levels of inequalities in education historically, high level like problems with education. But it's also related to factors such as inequalities in gender and a lack of cultural equality in terms of discrimination and racism and associated factors. So those kind of all these types of skills, even though the focus is also on programming skills, are unequally distributed and based on historic factors. When we think of the role of skills and the explanations for that, this is the model that we use for the From Digital Skills to Tangible Outcomes project, also the model that kind of guides the book, The Digital Disconnect, that I'm working on, and the Youth Skills project, which looks at the impact of the distribution of skills or the availability of skills on well-being of younger people, while the From Digital Skills to Tangible Outcomes projects focuses on all generations. So we can see that while access and the kind of attitudes towards technologies are important, that kind of they also are linked to literacy, and that the lack of access to high quality, ubiquitous technologies makes it harder to build different skills, but also that once people have that access, these skills are fundamental to translating the kind of use that we have with technologies into positive outcomes across a variety of domains. So, wealth and education, also labor market participation. Because I want to move on to Q&A and not talk too much myself about this. What is interesting to see is that the data on digital skills shows that these are kind of problem-solving skills in general in a country are very strongly related to these digital skills, and especially to the kind of things that people need to do everyday tasks. So, for example, at home, it's linked to a certain extent to the skills, the digital skills and problem-solving skills that people have at work, but especially for everyday skills. And we can see that in countries with low levels of basic digital skills across that range, engagement with government services is lower, even if people have access. And that this, again, is very strongly related to the kind of traditional human capital in terms of education and learning as available in society. So it means that, for example, in countries where digital skills and historically the kind of human capital has been missing, is that people are less able to engage with the government and health services or all kinds of services that are available online. However, there's some good news in this field in terms of participation in civic life as well, is that, for example, the traditionally disadvantaged groups, such as marginalized youth, with good access and skills, are more active online than they have historically been offline. And other groups, such as women, are also more likely in the digital space to translate these online activities into offline kind of action or confidence. So once access and skills are acquired, it has the potential to really transform a society. However, due to the kind of sequential and cumulative nature of inequalities, the groups have less access to quality and autonomous access, or the kinds of skills that would give them these opportunities to participate in the digital world. And furthermore, and this is important, and let me take you here to the next slide, which is where the poll is. And I don't know if Yara already has the results, but while I wait for the results, I will see. I don't really know where I should be seeing the results, but I will.
Hi, Ellen.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
just to let you know that we have already the results. So maybe you can show us what is there in the poll, and I'll tell you what was the reaction of our audience.
Okay.
And I'm sure it will be very exciting and interesting for them to see.
Okay, great. Yes, so I just wanted to introduce the slides to move on from the kind of previous point I was making, is to say that, you know, even having skills, and this is an important point to make, even having skills is not really enough, because we can see that like having these kinds of skills that are the focus of most kinds of policy, these more technical, operational, or information navigation skills, functional skills, is not enough to guarantee positive outcomes. And this is where causes and consequences become more complex. So the poll asked, you know, which kinds of young people are more at risk of achieving negative outcomes, such as, you know, being harassed or discriminated, but also not being able to participate to the same extent in or get educational outcomes or, you know, things like that. Is that what we see is that actually young people with emotional and psychological problems, or those who come from backgrounds, family backgrounds that have problems, is that it's actually young people with high levels of emotional problems and who have higher levels of skills who are most at risk of achieving negative outcomes. And if we compare them with the group of young people who don't have emotional problems, in that group, actually having higher levels of skills allows them to avoid negative outcomes. And interesting, which is not on this slide, is but that in both groups, higher levels of skills also lead to more positive outcomes. So the solution is not to say, okay, we won't teach people digital skills anymore, but we might need to think about what types of skills we are teaching young people and adults. And because the focus is on the technical, functional kinds of skills rather than these critical knowledge skills, that young people with problems kind of get lost in the digital world and kind of have the kinds of interactions that allow them to be more exposed to misinformation, influenced by others, and we see these same patterns in adults. So we need to kind of change the way we think about digital skills. We also need to be aware, and I'll stop. So that's the kind of first point for the discussion that I have, that digital literacy education should go beyond teaching these kind of more functional skills for the citizenry that's ready for the digital future with these strategic and critical skills that allow everybody to co-create and the digital as well as the social environment. And that kind of formal education around digital skills is unlikely to achieve this greater equality on its own, because informal learning is extremely important shaper of digital learning, and especially of these kind of more strategic and critical skills. We can see that the environment in which people live, the kinds of you know, this kind of digital and social ecologies in which people live are extremely important. So the home, but also workplace, the school, the neighborhoods in which we live, kind of shapes people's ideas about technology, but also kind of shape how we are able to engage with content online. And of course, if the right content is not online that aligns with these experiences that people have or the needs that people have, then it's unlikely to lead to positive outcome. So this is kind of this combination of factors, not individual skills necessarily on their own, but the environments in which people grow up and live, the kind of social cultural circumstances, means that those who've been historically disadvantaged are less likely to engage or to translate ICT use into higher quality outcomes, and are more likely to have more negative experiences, even with high levels of skills. So in a future that is coming, is around the corner, in which these technologies are embedded, where they become invisible. They require especially this digital literacy that is adaptable, and which emphasizes understanding and awareness of everyday interactions rather than use, and this understanding of how our own actions, our clicking, our linking, our creation of content in an everyday sense influence that nature of the personal and the societal environments that we inhabit, and that will be part of everybody's digital future. So I'll leave it at this because I'm really looking forward to hearing your questions are and engaging with you around it.
Great. Thank you very much, Ellen, for this very comprehensive and engaging presentation with lots of insights. Just to let know our participants and audience, they can still answer the poll on social media, and I will give now a sneak peek of the results for that we have for now. And then please put your questions in the Q&A. Use this incredible opportunity to interact directly with Ellen and to talk about inequalities in digital skills, but also how they're linked with social inequalities. So just coming back quickly to our poll, I think most of our participants have very good knowledge and understanding of the digital skills, and it's great. So 49% answered that young people or people with with high level of digital skills will have high level of emotional problems. Almost the same percentage of participants answered that people with low digital levels of skills will and high level of will have high level of emotional problems, and those with low level of digital skills will have low level of emotional problems, only 1%, and the third variant as well, only 2%. So most people, I think, they see that high level of emotional problems. It depends a lot on the well-being, and there is a link between the level of digital skills and emotional problems. Ellen, would you like to react on this?
Yeah, because actually I think this is a misunderstanding in a sense. You know, I also realized how the poll had me kind of translated or kind of emphasized the different elements. So it's not so much that emotional problems are related to high levels of digital skills, and you know we need to distinguish skills from actual use, right? So it's actually the case that digital skills have a different impact on the outcomes of our use and engagement with technologies. Depending on people's socio-emotional background. So it's often when we talk about the causes and the consequences of the use of technology that we think that it's the use that causes the kinds of emotional problems. But what we actually see is that if people come from environments that are problematic, that have, you know, where they have emotional problems, that engaging intensely in the digital world will amplify those kinds of problems. And it's not so much that the skills lead to the emotional problems, which is kind of sometimes misunderstood, or the use leads to the emotional problems, but that it can do so for particular people who come from particular backgrounds that don't, you know, that maybe are not as conducive to engaging in a positive way. I'll give you a quick example. You know, a young person who is bullied in school, maybe based on their race or you know, harassed based on their gender, who doesn't have a lot of social support, maybe who come from a family where there's not a lot of family support for this young person. You know, once they acquire digital skills, they will try to use the digital world to compensate for that kind of, you know, lack of support and lack of emotional well-being. And if these young people acquire the kinds of skills that allow them to engage very intensely with the digital world, they are much more at risk of disappearing into that digital world that will emphasize, they're going to seek validation, they're going to seek kind of the knowledge that maybe is not based on the reality of what the world looks like. And they are much more likely to be taken advantage of, or much more likely to come across information that might not be positive. And because they don't have the environment in which they will be able to talk about these experiences, they're more at risk of that becoming stronger, kind of a vicious circle of amplification of those problems. While those young people who have either no emotional problems or have kind of some issues but have a really strong support network, they don't run that risk because they kind of have that feedback from their everyday life. So I think one of the important things that I want to emphasize is that the digital is not separate from the social. That's also why I talk about social and digital inequalities, because the digital doesn't come out of nowhere and it doesn't exist on its own in a separate world. It's very much part of the societies that we live in, and therefore often reflect some of the patterns that we see in everyday life. So it's interesting that this kind of general assumption has come up as well amongst the respondents. Yeah.
Extremely interesting indeed. Your point about the importance of the environment and how the environment shape both our attitude towards technology, but also how we use technologies. And this is also something that, in fact, let's say even in education, because the environment and the context of families in which children are raised, they very much impact also the way they learn and how they're learning. We have lots of questions, lots of interest. I'll try to put some of them together, and we continue our discussion. Ellen, as we have now finished with the poll, we can probably stop sharing the screen with the poll, and let me start with the first question. It comes from Egypt. So, how to develop digital skills in societies with less opportunities? Is it possible to activate corporate social responsibility on this issue? And how do we consider the ethics of society and privacy, equality and rights when developing digital skills? I'm sorry, it's very
It's
long,
a lot of different questions together. That's fine.
it touches on important issues.
Yes. So I think this is a very important question. In terms of the kind of first aspect of it, with which the resources, of our countries which maybe lack resources or which have fewer resources in terms of, let's say, government resources, which I assume is one of the things that the person is kind of referring to, is that when, and if you think about the model that I presented, where I said where the role of digital skills is kind of an engagement, and in translating engagement of ICT across a whole variety of domains, it should become clear that none of the solutions to this are going to be ever a single stakeholder. It's never going to be just the government or just NGOs. It always has to be a multi-stakeholder environment. And because this is so important for the functioning of companies, for corporates, for the role that they can also as corporates play in improving the societies that they work in and operate in, there's a very important role to play for them. And it's a role in two parts, both in terms of corporate social responsibility, as was mentioned, in investing in projects to create, in the countries that they are in, to create a digital citizenry that is ready for that digital future, but also within the corporates themselves, because I think a lot of companies are fundamental in people's everyday lives, right? They are, people spend a lot of time working for them, and engaging with them. So in the workplace, programs can be established. Managers need to be trained to recognize what types of digital skills are missing. And this needs to be not just, which is still often the case, in terms of thinking about digital jobs. Yeah, because we think of digital jobs as people who are programming or are working explicitly with tech, the IT support team. But the reality is that, most jobs now have some kind of digital element, even if it's just seeing your payslip or being able to, communicate via some platform, like a social platform with colleagues or with management or something like that, email, social messaging, and social media. And for corporates to establish like a corporate culture in which people are educated, not just in the kind of technical sense on how to use the softwares that they have, but also in how to use them in a way that creates a good working environment that leads to more productivity and more, kind of connection with the workplace and with the society that the companies are, the corporates are working in. That's a fundamental role that corporates can play. And we already see some corporates taking that up, but often they are global corporates coming from other countries working, the big five, as they call them. And countries with less resources, often these corporates dominate that scene. And I think it's important to change that and to have more local corporates work from an understanding of the local context and the local kind of environment instead of importing it from abroad. I think that's fundamental for that to change.
That's a very interesting point, because we started with the skills for work and the responsibility of the private sector. And you also mentioned briefly the importance of localization of skills and of digital skills. And in fact, we have another question. I'm sorry, we're jumping from one topic to another.
Okay.
We have another question also about about localization of skills. So how, for example, developed countries, what are the obligations and responsibilities towards less fortunate people, and also how developed countries can get affected by those who have, for example, less digital skills or low digital levels of citizenship participation.
Yeah. So I think this is a kind of a very important point that goes both in a global sense if we think about intergovernmental organizations, or if we think about development programs. You talked about the SDGs, right? Or if you even think about like interventions at the national level or something like that, is that we cannot think about any of the SDGs, for example, or any development goals that you might have, or any programs for inequalities, without also thinking about the digital aspect of it, because that's the world we live in. Whether we like it or not, yeah, societies are becoming more digital. So any kind of intervention, whether it's around health, whether it's around education, whether it's around stimulating the economy, or getting more people into work, or high quality jobs, stimulating people being actively involved in creating more positive societies around the world. If that is the intention of any of these programs, these development programs, you have to think about what a lack of digital skills and understanding and access to the opportunities that are available in that digital world means. I think there's, as with kind of a lot of development programs, there is a risk of thinking about it from a perspective of the outsider. If we, for example, look at content creation, even about content creation, let's say about countries in the global south, most of the creation of content, this is knowledge about societies, knowledge in more generally, but also knowledge about cultures or knowledge about economies. It's often produced in English-speaking countries located in the kind of western part of the northern hemisphere. So even the creation of content and knowledge about our societies that is consumed by others and by the people that might live in the global south is actually not produced often by them. And sometimes this is linked to the lack of broad levels of these skills, as I talked about, right? So this is very important, and I'd like to emphasize again that this is not necessarily just about programming skills or data analytics skills. These are important because to be part of a digital economy, these need to be there. You need to have that high levels of skills. But actually, for kind of to be able to overcome these kind of levels of inequalities, we need a citizenry, a general population that has the ability to participate and generate knowledge and content at a more everyday level, at a more basic level, even if it's talk about YouTube or stuff like that, that is really important. And so I don't think you can do any kind of development program without thinking in that broad sense about digital skills. And it's very important to always incorporate and emphasize that across governments and across kind of different NGOs, even if they think they're not working in that digital space.
Thank you. Something very important that you mentioned, and I see that it comes also in the chat. We're still discussing the poll about emotional, socio-emotional well-being, and also about the level of digital skills. Then, in fact, the digital skills they are not always directly involved the use of technology. So, and even if we go to the different, we know that the concept of digital skills, it's an evolving concept that is a bit in emotion, which changes with the development of new technologies. Like, for example, now we have Internet of Things, artificial intelligence that have also some profound impacts on our society. And that in fact, digital skills, it's not what you also mentioned, it's not only about coding or programming or knowing how to use a computer, but also our critical thinking, critical skills, and collaboration, respect for others. So all this part of the whole set of digital skills. And this leads us to another question. Maybe we can go also to another area of education. Lots of question about education and how to protect children, how to develop children digital skills. Maybe just let me let me choose only one. For example, how can I let my kids avoid the negative impact of the internet and other social media sites? If they're well educated, what kind of awareness should I provide to them?
Yeah. So I think this is really important. We often focus on young people here for very good reasons, because in some ways they are the future, and we often worry about them because they're just kind of in a developmental sense, they haven't developed some of the skills that we think are necessary to participate in society. But I think the question is really important here because it already kind of has behind it this implication that this is not just about children, right? This is about parents, teachers, about other people in society. So when we talk about these social digital ecology levels that we have, it's not so much about what you tell them. Yeah, there's a lot of also a lot of panic around it. To be honest, that creates this idea that this digital world is extremely dangerous and extremely, that there's all kinds of things that can be completely wrong. But in a way that's a reflection of the world we live in to a certain extent. There's new things as well. It's like, it's not because you might have a car accident that you tell your child, or you teach the child you can never go outside the house, right? It's about, if you want to get to school and if you want to have the benefits of what is out there in the wider world, there's all these positive things that are also there in that digital space. Then you need to teach them how to recognize more negative, for example, interactions. You need to also really kind of, so those are the kind of more critical and knowledge skills. And this you can, and as I said at the kind of end of my presentation, this is hard because often the methods that we use for teaching are quite formal based and fact based. We teach, education has changed a lot over the last few decades, where it's become more about problem solving and about kind of broader issues rather than learning facts and repeating facts. And this also reflects the kind of learning that takes place in digital societies, where there's two elements to it. One is thinking about the outcomes that we want to achieve, what are the things that lead to, what are all the processes involved, and the different things that we need to do to get these positive outcomes. So that is kind of in a curriculum, for example, important to build in. But also when we talk about parents, it's not so much about what does the technology do, but how would you like to engage with technologies? And when you have a negative experience, or when you hear about some other negative experience, talk through what are the steps that could have been done differently. This requires not only teaching young people skills and understanding and critical awareness, but also parents and teachers and educators. And it's really important because we see in the research over and over again that it's exactly those types of skills that translate into better participation, more productive participation in education, but also in the labor force. So this is a cross-generational problem. That's the first thing that I would say. And then because informal learning is so important, it's, as I kind of already mentioned, not so much what you tell them they should be doing or what is happening, but what you show them. If you tell your child you shouldn't get lost and be addicted in social media, but then you are on your phone all the time while you are walking down the street or having dinner or something like that, or if the teacher is kind of, not engaging in a way that you would hope in a positive way with technology, then that's what the child is going to see, and that's these social digital ecologies. It's what they see around them, what they, and the discussion around that, and that's good parenting. That's good pedagogy or good learning practice, is that it's not, you need to walk through what you are doing and why you're doing it. Obviously for different ages this is different, and that's probably a long discussion that we don't have time for, but there's certain developmental stages at which you can teach people different things and different understandings. But it's showing that leads to learning as well, or co-learning, right? Sitting together, talking about what's going on. But it's also about acquiring the digital skills across societies, across generations, amongst adults as much as children, and having that societal discussion about what are these outcomes that we want to achieve, and how can we make sure that the digital world helps us to achieve those and avoid the more negative aspects of it.
In fact, Ellen, you already answered to another question. It was an interesting one about older people and how sometimes they're not eager, they're not keen in engaging with the digital world, and they don't want to use technologies. So they prefer to go the other way around. And I think this is something what you mentioned about intergenerational or cross-generational sets of digital skills. This is something that probably can be also applied not only to children, but to adults and to older people.
I would add one thing there, is that often this is because the focus of a lot of these programs and awareness campaigns and stuff is too much on the digital, right? It's about you have to go online because the society is digital. If you don't do it, then you won't be able to get X, Y, Z, or look at all the benefits that somebody else is having who has a very different life, who's a very different person from you. And the thing is, the digital is not about the digital. You know, I'm personally not that interested in digital skills. I'm interested in what digital skills can do for people to lead better lives, right? So when you do these interventions with older people, it's about really understanding what is it that they need to live better lives, and what is it that the technology can do for them if they acquire the kinds of skills to engage with that, to allow them to lead those better lives. And it's also respecting and understanding that for all of us, there is times when actually using technologies is not that beneficial to achieve those outcomes, right? And that is a discussion that we need to have. But to be able to make that informed choice about when you can and when you should and should not use technologies to achieve certain outcomes, we need to first have those skills and the literacy to understand in which ways this works. And I would add one more point, is that because there's a lot of talk, and you know, the title of my book is The Digital Disconnect, and I get a lot of questions about, oh yes, I want to disconnect more because it's so stressful to be online all the time. The problem is that it's kind of a privilege in some ways to be able to disconnect. You know, even if we say I'm taking a digital detox holiday, I'm not answering any emails over the weekend, we have a choice to do that. What we see in our research is that it's often the more vulnerable groups who don't have as much choice. You know, if you work for a company where they want to monitor your let's say you're in a delivery company, like they want to monitor your everyday move, wherever you go, when you're working, when you're not working, when you're taking a break, or governments with their benefit schemes. It's often the people who are more vulnerable, less powerful positions that don't actually have a choice not to use technologies. And it's a little bit beyond the scope of this talk, perhaps, but we need to also understand that often the discussions we're having about our digital skills and literacies and the ways in which we can apply them are not that relevant to the everyday experience and life world of people who live under very different circumstances. So I would say always with these intervention programs and policies, we have to start from a deep understanding of the needs and the everyday worlds and life worlds of the people. You know, like we talked about the emotional youth with emotional problems. What does it mean to acquire digital skills within that content, and how can they be used to achieve those more positive outcomes?
You mentioned a great point about the importance of human dimension, and in fact that we should start from the human needs and then see how technology can address these needs instead of going top down, that you need to have this set of skills and then whether you want, you have to apply them. So, and this is also an approach that UNESCO is very much promoting, human-centered use of technologies in education specifically, but also in all other areas, and that it's important. Especially we can see now also with the COVID-19 pandemic the importance of the collective dimension and the importance of the human dimension. When we think first about individuals and then about how technologies or digital skills can help them achieve, as you say, good outcomes and avoid bad outcomes. Yeah. Another interesting point. So maybe here I'd go to the questions of citizenship and participation. Also, quite a few inquiries about this. For example, how do you think digital citizenship is changing, and does this new digital dimension create new forms of participation?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen evidence of new forms of participation in terms of how they express themselves when we think about, you know, Twitter revolutions or something that was very much in the kind of press. I think kind of to start with where you said how has digital citizenship or has it changed because it now existed for a little while, is that we see that the kind of previous emphasis has been much more in research, but also in policymaking, much more on kind of formal political participation in terms of voting or participation in e-government services. We have some quite well-developed indexes now in terms of, e-government services and the use of these. That's we've seen that the emphasis was very much on that. And also on the inequality in that and who is able to access and use those services in a way that is beneficial. I think what we're seeing in terms of digital participation is now, in terms of where the emphasis lies to some extent, it's much more of the bottom-up approach. I work at the LSE, as you mentioned, and we there have an International Inequalities Institute, which I'm also part of, and we have one kind of theme that I'm leading with my colleague, Armin Ishkanyan, who is, which is focused on the politics of inequality, and it's kind of on the resistance and the reproduction of inequalities from below. And we see that that is an aspect that is going on across the world in terms of more broader thinking about citizenship. But especially in the digital space, this is very important because people have access to tools and they can reach audiences that they might not have been able to reach before. So that's the kind of more kind of big public kind of types of participation that we can now see that more people are getting engaged in. I would like to say that in that space, we still see that those people who come from more privileged backgrounds, even amongst the people that are, maybe disadvantaged or live in countries with kind of restrictive regimes and are trying to resist these developments, that they are often still the kind of more privileged people in those groups or societies that are able to do this. For an activist for their voice to be heard, they tend to be of a certain type of profile that is also media friendly, that it's kind of, they have to speak English very well because they're trying to reach this global audience. So that's kind of a side note that we need to not overestimate as well, how these things might lead to social change. But the other aspect of that is that there's another area where I think that we see a lot of change and that we have focused on less and that we actually know much less about, which is more of this kind of, like the aspect of misinformation or everyday discussions. And because it's a very important part, this kind of informal learning about what's going on in society and politics and all kinds of things. This kind of, that's where I'm coming back to that kind of informal learning. And it's not so much about this kind of skills to understand and critically evaluate information, which is important, but it's much more about those social and interaction skills that we see there. So when we think about digital literacy and the emphasis on digital citizenship, we've already seen a move that people are now really kind of starting to be aware that this kind of informal learning and information sharing is extremely important for citizenship. It might have been ignored a little bit because it used to take place, behind closed doors, but is now on all these social media platforms. But that actually, that even there, the emphasis is probably on the wrong kinds of literacy, that it's very much an idea that this is about understanding the facts or being able to figure out who's trustworthy or who's not trustworthy, that is the essence of digital citizenship. And of course, that's important. But actually what we see is that these digital literacies in terms of interaction and understanding how social media connects you with certain types of people, how certain discussions can escalate, how can be polarized, how technologies are built around that, algorithms, how we ourselves contribute to that by liking or reacting to certain posts and not others. That those skills are far more important in creating kind of polarized societies or less democratic societies or societies in which, whether information is true or not is actually not important, but it's about what it tells you about who you are and where your position in society is. Those kinds of skills are actually much more fundamental. And so there's a kind of these interaction and everyday content creation skills. And so I think that is one discussion that we need to start where we are not yet at. Because the emphasis is still very much on information navigation and kind of processing, rather than on our kind of understanding how the digital world kind of, creates things like echo chambers and things like that. So I think that's a really important question. And actually, I think in this context, as a last point to make, on this is that to a certain extent, these literacies are a lot less present in actually the privileged groups. So young people from disadvantaged backgrounds who come, have high levels of education, and who have quite comfortable lives, and similarly, the kind of adults and people who are activists, that they actually have a lesser understanding of this, because it's often people from disadvantaged groups, from discriminated groups, who very much kind of feel in their everyday experiences how these processes of amplification, polarization, get kind of play out in this digital space, because they're confronted with it every day. And so in some ways, this is a digital literacy intervention that needs to actually focus on more kind of, let's say, traditionally privileged groups to create that kind of awareness and knowledge, because it's often already there due to these negative experiences that a lot of discriminated and disadvantaged groups have.
Very, very insightful points about the creation of content and the relation of powers. And also, we have also a question about this on which you have already partly answered, on the consequences when the content is created by the whole, let's say, community of internet users, and then whether it will be safe and secure for all generations in the future. This is something that you already addressed even in your presentation, that in fact we think not only about what's happening now, but also what we do for the future generations and how internet and our society will look in the coming years and decades. So maybe another question about resilience. So we talked about the devastating impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, and that it created and amplified already existing inequalities. Can we enhance our resilience through digital skills?
Yes, if we get taught the right kinds of skills, I think, like by now it's become clear coming from, right? If we just teach people programming, and I'm not saying programming is not important, it's very important too, because these technologies need to be created by people who have very high levels of programming skills, and we need to teach also the programmers and the people who work on that high level of tech, this kind of ethical dimension of it, right? As they are going through computer science degrees or being taught digital skills, I think this ethical component, this understanding of the social impacts of how technology are designed is very important. But yes, I think it's not a question of can we, but it's a question of we have to. And to be able to do that, to create our resilience to, as the kind of this future that might be much more, where there's risks like global climate change, where there's, conflicts and polarization, where the digital plays such a fundamental role. We cannot but do this also through digital literacy. However, it needs to be taught in the right way, and kind of acquired in the right way, in terms of this kind of understanding, not just of how to use applications or apps or particular types of software, but really to understand what the consequences of our actions are, and in using the technologies, or in terms of how technologies are designed. One example that I sometimes used to illustrate this is that the digital world, in that sense, is actually different from our physical world, the offline world, as we sometimes call it, in that we actually, with every action that we take, every step that we make in that digital world, in terms of the links we click on, the comments that we make, shapes that digital world of the future. And we all need to be aware that if I like something, or I react to somebody's posts in some ways, and not react to other people's posts or other people's content or other types of content, then this content will become less visible in the future. If we like something, it will become more visible in the future. And we need to understand that, especially in the world of the Internet of Things and where technologies are embedded, all our actions have consequences for what that digital future will look like. And it is not just a matter of telling people who might be less connected to catch up. It's not the victim blaming type of thing, like, oh, people who are disadvantaged need to get digital skills. We need to all be aware that everyday actions, everything that we do in our environments that are increasingly digital, will have an impact on the future. And that's the discussion I think we need to have on how we can all together create that world that we might want, because technologies are shaped by us, not just by programmers or some digital God. It's us and how we act with technologies that's going to determine what that future will look like.
Exactly. We have only 5 minutes left, so and there are still lots of questions. Just maybe we will try to wrap up. And I see there were lots of interest about still the importance of digital skills for work and for employment, and the increasing mismatch of skills, what we are learning now and what will be necessary in the future. So one of the questions was about how can we develop the digital skills in this case if we know that that they always change? What should we do, or what can we do?
Yeah, so the interesting thing is that, and this has actually been the focus of a lot of the work that we've been doing with the From Digital Skills to Tangible Outcomes project, because the way that skills have been focused on in the past is it's almost like about can you use the apps or the technologies, the devices that are present right now, right? And those are not transferable skills to if the devices or platforms or apps change, right? So the kind of models that we have developed is to think about that in these broad 4 domains that we think are transferable skills that no matter what the digital future will look like in terms of technology, that these will be necessary to be able to engage. So we have the technical and operational skills, these kind of information navigation and processing skills, and these kind of more communication and interaction and content creation and production skills that are platform and device and a kind of technology independent in a certain to a certain extent, right? And just like we don't teach young people at school to read one particular book, yeah, and to be able to understand one particular book, we teach them how to engage with texts, yeah, and with reading and a critical understanding of text and what they mean. And then when they encounter a text in a different way, in a different platform, used by different people, produced by different people, they are able to still read it, even if it's not, yeah, in that kind of book form that used to be in this non-digital world. So these are the kinds of things that I think we need to work on right now, is to think about what are those transferable skills. And one of the things that we think about curriculums or courses is that it's not so much about teaching these digital skills as a separate subject, which you can do with the more technical skills in terms of how to learn how to use software or a device, but to integrate these in all the learning that we do. If we have a history course, you can say like, okay, now find information about X, and that's going to involve digital platforms. And we're going to learn through that use of platforms to find information about a historical event, how actually different platforms and different sites might present you with different information, how you need to search in different ways, how you need to understand why this content is produced in that way, who gets to tell history and stuff like that. And those are the kinds of skills that are transferable, not platform or technology dependent, that will allow us to do that even when it's, we're talking to our fridge to ask them about, the history of cheese or something like that. So I think that's the important thing, that we really focus on the transferable skills like we've done in traditional education. And we need to think about that across the curriculum. And not just as a separate thing that we need to teach right here, right now, into our digital reality of right now, but really think about the broader things that we need to engage with as we think about our digital participation or our participation in digital societies.
Great point, Ellen. Thank you very much for this emphasis once again on the importance of transferable skills and of engaging with a broader society and of linking digital and social, because digital is also becoming part of social and even of our physical or face-to-face lives. So I would like maybe just to conclude with one interesting questions about how will all people of all generations be involved in the development of digital skills. And for example, especially in the developed countries where the majority of all citizens are illiterate, what is the role of UNESCO and the government to reduce this So just to tell you that, of course, this is something that is part of UNESCO's and of other international intergovernmental organizations' agenda to promote digital literacy and digital skills. And we work extensively with the governments, with civil society, with communities, with educators and teachers and technical and professional educational institutions to include digital skills, first of all, in the formal education, and to create special programs for upskilling and reskilling and lifelong learning opportunities for those who are already work or adult learners. So this is an important point that should be mentioned. But of course, I think that it's a mix of governmental initiatives, of research and projects in which Ellen is involved, but also, of course, everything that is linked to individual initiatives and participation, and to be conscious and aware of the impact of the digital and social on our lives in general. So at this note, I would like to thank Professor Helsper for her presentation, for giving us a sneak peek of the digital disconnect, and for providing so many insights. It was extremely interesting, and lots of questions related to the digital skills and how they affect all our spheres of life. Also, thank you very much to the United Nations Development Programme and Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Knowledge Foundation for this initiative that creates this platform for raising awareness and providing dialogue on this important topic. So stay tuned for the next series of KnowTalks webinars. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.